Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we're focusing on Montgomery County, and there certainly is a lot to consider. The federal government shutdown and what it means for families in the county, reports of ICE raids raising concern in immigrant communities. Also, the latest proposals to redraw school boundaries are stirring debate across the county. County Executive Marc Elrich joins us to break it all down, what's at stake, what's next, and how it all impacts you, the county residents, and even perhaps those who may be a tad bit adjacent. Mr. County Executive, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Happy to be here. I always enjoy talking to you.
Thank you so much. Let me first talk about the federal government shutdown. We are 8 days in. What, from your perspective, are the immediate effects in the county?
I think the immediate effect is dread and concern. You know, the first effect is psychological. Now that this is hit, I think people are beginning to feel it. And I think there's a lot of worry that this is going to go on for a very long time. One of his did go on for a very long time. That has people worried. The new wrinkle where they're trying to figure out how not to pay people when they have an agreement that they're supposed to be paid. I'm sure Trump's not foregoing his salary and his clowns aren't giving up their money for that period of time. So I don't know anybody else would be expected to do that. That's going to raise a level of concern. So I think it's just kind of added to the angst that people have. And, you know, the most disingenuous thing about what he's doing, he's like, well, if, we shut down, we're going to have to fire all these people. He's firing all the people he was going to fire if Congress convened and they passed his new budget. Because everybody he was getting rid of were people they didn't plan on having on the payroll after October 1st. So it's not like, they were willing to negotiate something and prevent all these job losses. They're going to take these jobs anyway, which is really, really disturbing. The ones they're going to fire rather than the ones who are just going to be put on leave right now, they're going to get nailed, and it's going to be painful.
Yesterday, Prince George's County Council passed a measure to provide assistance to furloughed and fired federal government workers. And while it does include a career and job training for free at Prince George's Community College, as well as preferential hiring for those federal government workers who are making application to be hired by the county government, it does not include the original proposal, which suggested $1,000 checks be sent out. The reality is that the county, which is facing some deficit issues, some budget issues, could not afford it. Does Montgomery County have any similar kinds of plans or thoughts about that kind of thing?
So we're launching a bigger thing this week, I think it is. It's the Federal Workforce Career Center, and it opens tomorrow. We already have a policy in place where we were able to give some preference for federal employees. The good thing and sad thing is we don't have a lot of vacancies. Mm-hmm. And the places where I have most vacancies are the police department are good matches for the people coming out of the federal government. That's probably not the kind of work they want to do or that they'd be able to step into. So we don't have a lot by ourselves, but the whole point of the Workforce Center is to coordinate our efforts with private sector efforts. We know, for example, that in the sciences that they've been able to bring people in to companies that are looking for people. So this does expand the number of people who could get jobs in the life sciences, who had jobs doing similar work for the federal government. So we've been able to do some of this stuff, and we're going to keep doing it. If people need medical care, this county's got 11 clinics in the county, so you'll be able to go for free to our clinics if you wind up losing your job and have to get medical care. You don't have a period when you're not going to be without it, or it's too much for you to eventually figure out how you're going to pay for it. We're able to support, some of that stuff. We last time restaurants and individuals contributed food to people so that they could make sure we could keep people fed. So we'll do as much as we possibly can to deal with what is a really ridiculous situation.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because there has been some concern during the course of the shutdown as it continues about reduce or even loss of WIC or SNAP benefits, specifically the WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children program. Your thoughts about that?
But it is amazing to me the things that this administration is destroying. He started with all this crap about efficiency. The stuff he's doing has nothing to do with efficiency. I think the number of SNAP households is somewhere north of 70,000 in Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. That's a severe hit, and that means if the state or the county is not able to step up, that's going to be a lot of pain for people in terms of what they're going to not be able to get. So that's something that concerns me a lot. We've been, we have done traditionally the income supplement, the working families income supplement. So we've put more money in of the county money that backs up what the state puts into it. So we do some things to help people, but this is going to be tough. SNAP puts food on the table for people who can't afford to put food on the table, and with grocery prices being what they are, you hear everybody complaining about it. Now imagine that you're experiencing how expensive it is and you don't have a job. That's going to be, I think, pretty disturbing.
As you are well aware, Montgomery County is the most racially diverse county in the state. And with a
country.
I beg your pardon?
In the country, actually.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much for that. And with a huge percentage of Latino residents, I did want to spend some time, because this is really kind of where we are about this, and I want to kind of go back to something that happened a week or so, the canceling of the Hispanic Heritage Festival. That arguably the biggest event in this region. Talk to me about your thoughts behind doing that as it relates to certainly the ICE officers who may be hanging around.
Yeah. If all they were doing is hanging around, I would have had a party. It wouldn't have been a problem. It's not the only festival that got canceled. There was a big El Salvadoran festival at the beginning of the summer that these sponsors canceled because it would have involved bringing 5,000 or more people into an area that was actually enclosed by fences, and they were not comfortable putting those many Hispanics in fenced-in area for fear that it would make it very easy for ICE to come and have a very large collection. And so that was concerning. Our folks were talking with and work with the advisory groups we have, and the consensus of the people from the community was they didn't feel comfortable asking people to come out to something that would be well publicized and known to be a large gathering. They weren't comfortable with that. So what we decided to do instead is take the money that we would have spent on that and do lots of different festivals in schools and other places where you're still celebrating Heritage Month, but you're not putting it out in one big place where the feds might have an easy target for lots of deportations. I feel like right in this moment, because we don't have federal troops or National Guard here, and he hasn't been able to hire up all the ICE employees he wants, we probably could have done it because Maryland doesn't have enough ICE officers in the state really to mount large operations, not multiple large operations, I don't think. But that's going to change. That as soon as he gets his money and they start hiring, that's going to be a very different story. So I felt as long as they were small, maybe we could have managed it. But if the people who you want to celebrate with you aren't comfortable going to the celebration, there's not much point in putting it on.
But so with that said, I do know, and certainly you're aware, County Council member Natalie Fani Gonzalez was essentially saying the show must go on despite the threats of something like this happening. If those shows, as it were, these heritage festivals, were to go on, how might the county defend against that? I mean, as you said, they may not have enough ICE agents now, but certainly there is nothing that prevents the Trump administration from shifting to where they may be participating in, whether it be DC or Northern Virginia, and moving into Maryland.
Pretty much exactly what you said. Natalie's not the decision maker.
Certainly.
And
she does have a constituency.
She has a constituency, but it was the representatives of her constituency who told us they did not feel safe doing that. And I don't want to put them in a position, and I would not want my staff to make a decision that we're going to put you in that situation anyway. If you don't want to come, don't come. That's not a way to celebrate it. We can have multiple celebrations and make sure we're doing the right thing by, having events around the holiday, but not creating a situation. I'm sorry she doesn't like the decision, but it wasn't an executive decision where we just said, yeah, we're going to shut this down. We think we know best. It was the people who would be most effective. I'm not getting hauled off on an ICE raid. They are. They're the ones. You and me, we'll skate by. But the ones who aren't, they should have something to say about whether they're invited to a party if the party can't be secured. And there's no real way to secure it. We cannot put police between ICE and an event. And our police are not going to act to block ICE. They can't do that. They will all be arrested. That would be the nicest outcome. I could picture things going even further south. So I don't, that's not going to happen. And if I can't protect them, I don't know what you expect me to do. It's just like it. I wish we could. I wish I could just say, you can't come here. It'd be nice if we just issue a statement saying not welcome in Montgomery County. I can say they're not welcome in Montgomery County, but it doesn't mean I can keep them out of Montgomery County.
Are you at all concerned about ICE raids happening outside of public schools? As you may or may not be aware, the Washington Post published a couple of weeks ago video of arrests being made outside of a DC bilingual charter school. And certainly there were questions about whether or not the Metropolitan Police Department and their level of cooperation. That is obviously different from something that would happen in the state of Maryland or even in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But is that a concern that they could wait outside of Montgomery County Public Schools?
It's a concern. And I think, the whole strategy is to make people so afraid and uncertain that they pick up and leave. I mean, if you've got to worry about whether your kid's going to get picked up and dragged off, it's a real concern that if I send my kid to school, am I going to see them again? Are they going to hold the kid hostage? Am I going to have to turn myself in order to see my kid again? I mean, it's a pretty horrible thing they're doing. I grew up with Richard Nixon, who I thought, was pretty bad and, certainly no friend of democracy. He had his ideas about what he'd like to do. He's a pussycat compared to Trump. Trump is actually willing to physically harm people and to put people in harm's way in a way that even Richard Nixon couldn't do. And that's pretty bad when you've reached the level of things that even Richard Nixon couldn't do. That's pretty disturbing. Demonstrators, he may not have liked us. Nixon clearly didn't like demonstrators. He didn't say you're all a bunch of traitors and I'm going to arrest you all and that this is an insurrection. Not even him, not even Barry Goldwater. I mean, scions of the conservative wing of the Republican Party never were in this kind of crazy place.
Hold on, Mr. County Executive. I have much more to talk to you about this issue and many more happening in Montgomery County. We are going to take a quick break. Don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM Channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We are continuing our conversation about some of the current issues happening in Montgomery County with County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm wanting to continue on with, the theme of immigration and the ICE arrests and the like. One of the I'm interested in hearing what kinds of conversations you've had with representatives of the Latino community in the county recently. Certainly, the ICE raids really started ramping up in February, in March, but we are now in the 8th month. I'm sorry, the 10th month of the Trump administration. And so we've seen how these things have progressed. What are you hearing from the community?
They're worried. They're flat out, they don't know where this is going to go. I think they've seen enough of him to know that his threats are credible. It's not like we expect him to make noise and not do anything. He will clearly do things. His latest moves with the National Guard make it pretty clear. And what was interesting yesterday was he sending the comment in the paper about the National Guard was that they were there to assist ICE enforcement which is not the crime wave in Portland, the make-believe, Portland lawless, degeneration. It had nothing to do with that. It's about those guys are there to help the ICE agents do their enforcement. So he tells his MAGA base one thing: I'm going to save Portland from the violent radicals, and really what he's doing is sending them in there to evict or deport mostly civilians who've never committed a crime. Mm-hmm. So, and I think people feel that, and there's less attendance at events. We had a celebration in the county office building. It was much smaller than it normally would have been, but it was the kind of event that people felt comfortable with. But everybody expressed concern about where they are and what the fears are.
Are you concerned, and if so, in what way, about the economic impact of the threat of ICE raids? Yep. Particularly when we're talking about Latino businesses, Silver Spring, Wheat, even at the borders of Prince George's County, Langley Park, etc.
Look, it's more than Latino businesses, Latino workforce. Latino businesses are a vibrant part of our economy, but the Latino workforce exists in more than just Latino businesses. I'm concerned about construction sites. I've walked around some construction sites of buildings that are going up right now, and you look around at the workforce and you got to wonder how many of those folks are going to be able to stay. And when is ICE going to decide, let's go to a construction site where there are lots of people we can take in one fell swoop? And those are extra convenient because a lot of them are fenced in to start with to keep people from going on site and stealing stuff. So you sort of have a captive workforce there. And I worry about that. And I think other people worry about that as well. These folks work in every profession you've got in Montgomery County. There are lawyers here. There are people who, have been here so long, they've bought homes. They're still not, documented technically, but they've, set up families here. Some of them they talk about Latino businesses, people who invested and started businesses. but remained undocumented. That, because it never seemed to be like a pressing issue. You weren't, you were here, you were doing business, you were doing what we want people to do, which is help us grow the economy and provide opportunities for people. And people didn't get around to getting themselves documented. And sometimes the waits were apparently extraordinarily long. And now we wind up with those folks being likely to lose their jobs. They will lose their businesses. ICE is not going to say, we'll give you like a month to settle your affairs, sell your business or sell your house and all that. You could just be picked up and whisked away, and everything you've got left behind, and no means of managing it when you're out of here.
Yeah. And not to solely focus on the Latino community, because again, there are people who have immigrated from all over the world, specifically to Montgomery County. There
Yes.
are Asians, you have people from the Caribbean, people from West Africa, people, obviously there's a huge Ethiopian community here. Are they also expressing concern?
Yes, there are people in the Ethiopian community, for example, who are losing their protected status. And, that will be, it may be 300 and some individuals we had a count of, but if you count the families, the people that could be affected by this is, could easily be 1,000 or more people. That we when I go around, whether it's talking to people, businesses who are thinking about locating here from inside the United States, or when we talk to people from other countries about coming here, we talk about our diversity. I was, saying earlier, we're the most religiously diverse and culturally diverse county in the United States. And just the statistic about where we've come from. This county in 1975 was 95% white, 4.5% black, and 0.5% everybody else. And the 0.5% black was an increase over 1960, and that's because in 67 they passed a fair housing law in Montgomery County, which meant you could buy or rent in Montgomery County. Prior to that, you couldn't buy or rent in Montgomery County. Also, if you were Jewish, you couldn't buy or rent. So that was a problem. But today, we have become a county that's 21% black, 22% Hispanic, 16% Asian. Hispanic and Asian didn't even rate a tenth of a percentage point back then. And then it's about 43% white. So we've undergone a remarkable transformation as a county. And I think, to Trump and his friends, we're kind of like the poster child for how this actually works. People do live with each other. People do go work side by side with each other. People build an economy and build a community together. And we're able to do that with an incredibly mixed population. Just those 4 designations I gave you don't even get to the national designations, because within Asia, it's pretty much every country in Asia. Within Africa, it's not every country, but it's, a bunch of countries in Africa, Latin America, Central America. So we're the home to a lot of people who came here because they kind of knew, and we've made it no secret that if you come here, you're welcome here. Your kids will get an education. You'll have opportunities. You'll have the opportunity for a good life.
I do want to pivot. I want to pivot to some issues regarding the Montgomery County Public Schools. This, also still of major concern. In speaking to the superintendent, what provisions, if any, have been made in the event that parents decide not to send their children to school because of fear of ICE raids?
I don't know if they've made arrangements for what happens if parents don't send their children to school. And that's something I can follow up on for you, but I don't know if they've made that kind of provision. I'm not sure what they would do. They obviously aren't going to do homeschooling because they don't have teachers to go out and do that. So that's a real limiting factor. I know they've been training the teachers about what you can do. So because we want to make sure everybody knows, there are places where even if ICE wants to, they can't go. And so where are those safe places? They're not supposed to come into the school building. They should not be on school property, just waiting outside the door. So, and knowing that those are the rules, those are things people can say. And we want the teachers to feel comfortable. We don't want them confronting a crying child or somebody who's terrified and not be able to tell them anything or not be able to offer them some assurance that they're going to be safe in the school. What happens outside the school is the scary part. And I think, Trump, being the kind of horrible human being that he is, will think nothing of taking a kid hostage to get to the parent. That's, and I think that's what every parent works about, thinks about. That's, the leverage is, you take my kid, I got to come out. And it's horrible that a person would do that, let's just say.
I do want to talk about this other issue about the boundaries for schools. Some might say on the face of it that Montgomery County has an embarrassment of riches where everybody wants to come and be a part of the Montgomery County school system. They want their children to be educated in the Montgomery County school system, but you can't build new schools in a day.
Nope. Yeah. Actually, we don't need new schools. I mean, the problem is you build schools. Like my community in Takara Park is a great example. We had Blair High School, and Blair had 3 middle schools that fed it. There was a time in my lifetime when they were going to close all but one of the middle schools. They said there aren't enough kids here. There's, the neighborhoods aren't pumping out kids. It wasn't like a year or two after that discussion where people start saying, look at all those baby carriages in our neighborhood. And that's what happens. Neighborhoods turn over. And so schools get filled at different times. Then you do new development. The new development usually starts with people coming in and wanting to, set up homes, and often come to their first single family house to start a family. That's something that people often do. It's a normal thing. And so those neighborhoods come up and then grow, and then they'll have a cycle, when they've gone through 2 or 3 kids, take that over about 16 years, 15 years, and then you're back in with, less households with children again. So it ebbs and flows to the county. You can't be building the school every time it pops, the population shifts. More sensible thing is to adjust your boundaries. We're moving people by bus anyway. It's not like buses will have to be invented for this. We move a fair number of kids by bus today. And so you should see some boundary shifts. They're also trying to maintain some balance in the schools.
Now please continue.
So, you're trying to avoid, where you can, having very non-diverse populations in a county that's as diverse as ours is. You want kids to have that experience.
That sounds like busing.
Yeah, but the county never embraced the kind of when I was growing up in the 60s. I knew people who were in Prince George's County, where the busing there was basically implemented by the most racist school board they ever had, and their goal was to make busing as painful as possible. So they would move people the farthest they could possibly move them. So the bus rides were the longest they could possibly be. And they gave busing a really bad flavor for all the people who were involved in it. I worked for a guy, a black guy who, went to school, and he got to experience the busing. And he said it was horrible. You'd be going past schools you could go to a school that was farther away, just to make this an ugly experience for everybody. Montgomery County never embraced that kind of busing. And what they've tried to do is to work around where you have clusters that are close to each other. And there are schools in Montgomery County that are not far away from each other that have dramatically different populations. And that's an opportunity to create a more integrated 2 schools, not just a more integrated 1 school. It's an opportunity. I've talked with them about that, and they have a couple of schools like this, where you make 1 school a K-2 school and the other school is a 3-5 school. Now you've got the population from both communities mixed together. The school's not overburdened because you have half the students in the school at any given time. So you can actually maintain the same population with the 2 schools, but you wind up with more balanced schools. And I think that makes sense. So I think the county's done it in a way that's been pretty responsible.
When do you anticipate that this boundary shifting will be complete?
Um, they're going to finish it up this winter, and that's at least that's my impression of what they were doing. And then they've got to do the elementary schools. Once these are set, then you're going then you're going to get into the smallest of the schools and see where they fit with the new clusters they created. So it's an interesting approach, but we'll see how that works, and then we'll hear this all again. Because when you
Are
start
you concerned about pushback from communities? I mean, changes is always difficult for a lot of people, and there have already been questions raised about not necessarily the why, but the if it should be done.
Yep. I get the letters. Most of the letters, I will say, would prefer some other plan. I get letters from people who like the plan and say support it. I don't have anything to say about it because this is completely in the school district, in the superintendent and the board. But I've heard people say, I don't like this plan. We'd like to keep our school together. We'd like one of the other plans. And they've got to think about that. Can they achieve the things they're trying to achieve if they keep some of these schools together? Nobody likes change. You kind of said it. This is not anybody's favorite thing. You feel like you move into the neighborhood, the school, you know what you expect. A lot of people, choose schools by how good they think the schools are. That's the neighborhood they move into. They don't want that changed because they made a decision to live there for them because what they thought was, the kind of school they were going to, probably less diverse than the ones that might result from something like this. But it is what it is, and people are going to have to deal with it.
One other question, and while certainly this is, within the purview of the school superintendent, but I still would want to hear about your opinion and your thoughts about the background checks issue. That, on the face of it, is frankly shocking, where you had thousands of staff, teachers, what have you, who did not have updated or completed background checks. The chief of staff during a hearing last week said so far as the school system has tried to address this, has only found one person who may have questionable security issues. Maybe that's a good thing, but the reality is I can't imagine any parent, upon hearing these reports, would take comfort in this.
No, I don't think people were very happy to hear this. I hope the number is low, and I think that by and large the number probably is going to be low, because they were probably thinking if you were applying for a job, you probably thought you were going to get a security clearance. But so that's often a deterrence. When you think that something's going to happen, you don't apply. But to the numbers we've got right now, as of the 3rd, they've completed almost 3,700 checks out of the 4,900 applications, and there remaining 1,200 paper applications to be completed, and that's where they are. So I think they've gotten that 76% pretty quickly. So I think this is going to get resolved pretty quickly.
How could something like this happen, though?
That's a good question. Somebody over there obviously wasn't paying attention. The people responsible, are no longer there. The Superintendent Taylor was not well served by the management and the people who were behind and were responsible for this. Somebody had to know what they were doing or what they weren't doing. This, can't have only been discovered by the Inspector General, and nobody else had a clue. I mean, they did background checks. If you're suddenly not doing background checks, you'd think somebody would have noticed it and said, hey, guys, we got to do background checks. It's really disappointing, but I don't think any of those people will wind up working there when this is all done.
I do want to go back to the shutdown issue in these last few minutes or so. If this shutdown remains unresolved into the later fall or winter, let us say, for the sake of argument, that this becomes another the 35-day shutdown as we saw in
Yep.
2018. What do you believe would be the worst case scenario for the county? Where do you think the biggest impact would be felt?
Let's just start by saying it depends. If he pulls off this thing about not paying people, then that's going to be swift and immediate, because people would take on debt without any hope of being reimbursed. If it's one thing to be without work for a month, and maybe you get into your savings and you scratch by, or you take a short-term loan to pay a mortgage payment, but the next month you're going to be getting the pay for the back pay you missed. But if people actually lose the pay, it's going to put people in a whole different economic situation of taking on debt without an income and no prospect of being able to pay it back necessarily. That is going to be, really, really hard on people. And so I'm concerned that people are going to be put through really difficult times for no rational reason. And, in 2018, we knew the shutdown was going to end. I mean, that's how you managed it. You just knew, okay, sooner or later they come to their senses, and they're going to pass something. But if Trump's view is the only bill that he'll accept is a bill that gives him everything he wants, and he gets to starve people, deprive people of medical care, deprive people of job training and all these other things that supposedly make America better and stronger, you're going to destroy research at NIH. If his passable bill requires that all those things be left out, I don't know how this gets resolved.
If the Obamacare subsidies are not supported, after December, what would that look like regarding healthcare in the county?
Well, I think there'll be people who lose their healthcare. I mean, without the subsidies, there are people who aren't going to be able to afford the new premiums. Somebody was telling me that, they had a premium increase of like $1,200 a month. For some people, you're talking food on the table. Oh, you're talking part of your rent money or car payments. So this is, an unexpected disaster for people. And he was going to, I'll go back to what I said, he was going to do that anyway. That is the price of the new bill, giving him the clean, big, but ugly bill, to put it the way it should be put. To give him that bill is to sign the elimination of all those jobs and all those programs in this country. So he's blaming this on the shutdown. It's all he's being disappointed by was, man, he might have had to pay these people for a couple more months or a month until the issue is resolved. He doesn't even want to do that.
I mean, could Montgomery County or municipalities like the county, and even if something like that were to happen, in your county executive crystal ball, what would be the out of the box thinking to try to support something like that if those subsidies were not to continue?
I think it's going to require a lot of thinking between us and the state, because the state is often the source of, they're the ones, for example, that chip in on the SNAP benefits. So the first thing is to figure out, what does the state have? We would be looking at what are our reserves? What can we go into without jeopardizing the county? That's a serious issue for us. But we were fortunate. We left this summer, the end of the year, with more than $73 million over what we had budgeted. My term here for my time as the county executive has been very conservative fiscally. I know it probably shocks people, but we're the only administration that ever achieved 10% reserves, and we've been as high as 17. So we have some money we can put forward, and the federal government, FEMA, actually reimbursed us about a month ago for COVID expenditure that was, over $40 million. So we got this, and we weren't sure we were going to see that reimbursement. So we got that reimbursement. So we have a little buffer. So one of the things is, okay, now we got to put together a list of what's it going to cost us to backfill for programs that he cuts. For me, one of the most important is if he's seriously not going to give us money for Head Start, if there are undocumented kids in the program, then that is like the most important program we have to get kids ready for school. It actually should go back further than, the last 2 years. And we're talking now about to start, we're actually doing part of a program that goes back to year 0, which is where you really need to begin this. So we'll look at, what would it take us? How much would the county have to come up with to backfill the loss of federal money for Head Start? We'll probably have to look at that for, some other programs. And then, right now, I feel like I've got some money I can comfortably spend. We can probably increase rent subsidies for people. We can probably give people eviction prevention money, some money, but I'm not going to be able to handle everybody's loss of income. And then you get to the immediate picture for the county is that if people really lose these many jobs, then I think you're talking 20,000 jobs to 40. Some people are saying maybe 10,000 jobs, but 10,000, 20,000. If you lose those many federal workers whose average pay is around $150,000, you've just lost a ton of tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And all these programs we run are dependent on those tax dollars.
It may be a tad bit early to ask you this, but your term ends next year. What would you, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again, but what would you think your legacy is as county executive, the most important thing that you've done since you've been in office?
I think a couple of things. One is we've really expanded the social safety net. When I came in, everybody knew what the shortcomings were, and we had just kind of accepted it. And I started asking people. I said, if you're going to give me proposals, I may not be able to fund everything, but tell me where you need to go. I may not have enough money to do everybody's where you need to go, but at least I want to know what you're shooting for, so that we can understand that we've got a big job here to do in the county. We put more money into working family supplements. That's real dollars that go to people, that helps them meet their bills every month. We did a pilot with a kind of an income supplement for people to see how that would work and how if that changed. And we're still waiting for a final report on that. We'll continue to look at what opportunities we have, particularly to partner with the state. The state they've got all the economic headwinds that I have, plus more, because he's got federal workers all over the state. So he's going to have my problem, and he's going to have the statewide problem. So I think all of us are going to have to figure out, where do we put our resources? And then if we really do have a decline in resources next year, where do you make the cuts? I will say, to be blunt about it, a lot of what Trump has rationalized is a lot of these things he's cutting, he's giving to the state and local governments. Like FEMA is now the state responsibility, unless you're a red state, in which case apparently FEMA still works. But in blue states, it's a state responsibility. So if it's the state responsibility that, the billionaires and billionaires, voted for, and surely they understand that when Trump says it's a state responsibility, he's getting out of the business. It would make sense for Maryland to make up the taxes to the extent they can by taxing the higher incomes, the ones who got his biggest tax break.
Well, I guess the thing I was specifically asking in this last minute, when we talk about your own legacy and the thing that you were most proud of, is it school investment? Is it housing? Is it infrastructure?
I'd say school investment, because we put record money into schools to deal with, with the staffing shortages and the teacher shortages. Housing, we put record money into housing, more money than's ever been put into housing. And we're getting deeper affordability than people got before. We're actually, getting more affordable deals because we're doing more deals. And I frankly say, because we've asked for it. We've dealt with developers And we've just been very clear what our expectations are. And to the extent the county has levers, we're not going into these things and just saying, well, here we just want 15%, we're done. We've gotten projects, we've gotten 30% affordable out of them. But one of them, a couple of them are actually really big. One's going to be restoring the Emory Grove community. It's going to have 500 houses up there. We opened up the Allium Apartments, 200 units in the new apartment building. We are doing everything we can to expand our ability to build housing in the county. I think economic development, I think, we have kind of made sure that we made life sciences in Montgomery County more visible. That's one of our great strengths. And it's always been kind of like, we were just lucky. We were in the right place, right time, and the life science industry popped up here. And we've really made an effort to expand it. When I came into office, I was told,
Mr. County Executive, I'm sorry, I'm literally out of time, unfortunately. But we will be talking again, and we will revisit that. You still have some time in office to talk about that legacy. But I want to thank you so much, and we will certainly be in touch.
Yes, I always enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much.
And
Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. That's the Daily Drum for this Wednesday, October 8th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.